A small beggar found a briefcase with $1 million belonging to a millionaire and returned it. The harshest winter in 50 years gripped the city in its icy embrace, snow falling like frozen tears on the abandoned streets. Among the swirling flakes, a small figure huddled against the bitter wind. Logan, a 10-year-old boy with haunted eyes and threadbare clothes. In his trembling hands, he clutched a leather briefcase he'd just found, its contents worth more money than he'd ever seen. But within those worn eyes lay not greed, but an unwavering moral compass, one that would soon change not just his life, but an entire community's heart. For now, though, he was just a child in the cold, facing a choice. Before we start, share where you're watching from. If you're new or haven't subscribed, please click subscribe. It means the world to us. Thanks. The city knew Logan as the boy who lived in shadows, a child whose past was stained by whispered accusations and cruel assumptions. At just 10 years old, his small frame carried the weight of a tragedy that had branded him an outcast. His parents' death in a mysterious house fire a year ago had left more than just physical scars. It had marked him with a stigma he couldn't escape. The rumors spread like wildfire through the affluent neighborhood where the tragedy occurred. Some claimed they'd seen him playing with matches that fateful night. Others whispered about insurance money his parents had recently acquired. The police, more interested in closing cases quickly than finding truth, had written it off as a tragic accident, but the whispers never stopped. The truth that Logan had desperately tried to save his parents, his small hands pounding against their locked bedroom door as smoke filled the hallway, remained buried beneath the weight of social prejudice. Now, in the grip of the coldest winter in decades, Logan wandered the streets with nothing but memories and an old, singed photograph tucked safely in his coat pocket. The picture, slightly melted at the edges, showed happier times, his mother's gentle smile, his father's proud stance, and a younger Logan, eyes bright with innocence not yet lost. He would touch it sometimes when the cold became unbearable, or when passers-by would cross the street to avoid him, clutching their purses tighter. The local shelter had turned him away after hearing the rumors, afraid his presence would disturb their other residents. Even the church, with its promises of sanctuary for all, had suggested he try the next parish. The bitter irony wasn't lost on Logan. He was deemed too dangerous to help, yet too young to survive alone. During days he would linger near his old school, watching children his age rush past with their backpacks and laughter. The principal had asked him to stay away, claiming his presence upset the other children. Logan knew the truth. It wasn't the children who were upset, but their parents, who didn't want their precious offspring sharing space with that boy from the fire. Yet, despite everything, Logan maintained a dignity that belied his years. He never begged, instead offering to sweep sidewalks or run errands for the few shopkeepers who didn't immediately chase him away. Mrs. Chen, the elderly owner of a small convenience store, would sometimes slip him a warm bun when no one was looking, her eyes full of unspoken sympathy. But even she couldn't openly help him, afraid of losing customers who might boycott a store that harbored the fireboy. The winter had been particularly cruel this year. Snow piled in drifts against buildings, and the wind cut through his thin jacket like knives. Logan had learned to sleep in shifts, moving between different doorways and abandoned cars, never staying long enough for anyone to call the authorities. He'd discovered that the loading dock behind the old library stayed relatively warm thanks to a ventilation system, and the security guard there, a quiet man with sad eyes, pretended not to notice him on particularly cold nights. Most heartbreaking was how Logan still maintained his humanity despite everything. He would share his meager findings with the stray cats that roamed the alleys, speaking to them in soft tones about his dreams of clearing his name. When younger children would get lost in the neighborhood, he would guide them home from a distance, vanishing before their parents could emerge to either thank or chase him away. Each night, as he curled up wherever he could find shelter, Logan would take out the photograph and whisper to it like a prayer. "I'll make you proud," he would say, his breath visible in the frozen air. "I'll show them who I really am." He never cried tears would freeze in this weather, but his eyes held a depth of sadness that made even hardened hearts pause, if only for a moment. This was who Logan truly was, a child bearing the weight of adult prejudices, maintaining his dignity and kindness in a world that had shown him neither. He was not the monster of neighborhood gossip, but a boy who still believed in goodness, even when goodness had seemingly abandoned him. It was this unbroken spirit, this unwavering moral compass, that would soon lead him to a discovery that would change not just his life, but the hearts of an entire community. But for now, he was just a small figure in the vast winter landscape, trying to survive not just the cold, but the colder hearts of those around him. Charles Lancaster sat in his wheelchair by the grand bay window of his mansion, watching snowflakes dance against the darkening sky. At 68, his silver hair and distinguished features masked a heart heavy with its own tragedies. Behind him, the vast empty rooms of his mansion echoed with memories of laughter long silenced. 20 years ago, he had lost his wife Elizabeth and daughter Sarah in a car accident that also took his ability to walk. The official report blamed black ice on the road, but Charles knew better. He had spent years quietly investigating, discovering evidence that the brake lines had been tampered with, evidence that pointed to his own nephew, Franklin, though he could never prove it definitively. The wealth that surrounded him, the antique furniture, priceless artwork, and crystal chandeliers, felt hollow without family to share it. His business empire, built from nothing after growing up in poverty himself, now seemed meaningless. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had everything money could buy, yet nothing that truly mattered. Charles spent his days managing his business empire from his home office, but his real work happened in secret. Behind the facade of a wealthy recluse, he maintained an extensive network of private investigators and contacts, slowly building a case against Franklin. His nephew, meanwhile, maintained a perfect public image, charitable donations, social appearances, and a carefully cultivated reputation for philanthropy that masked his true nature. The servants whispered about Charles's occasional late-night meetings, about the mysterious files he kept locked in his study, about the way his eyes would follow Franklin at family gatherings with a mixture of sadness and quiet determination. Only his most trusted driver, Miguel, knew the full extent of Charles's investigation and the toll it took on him. Sir Miguel had said one night, after driving Charles home from another disappointing meeting with a potential witness, "Perhaps it's time to let go," but Charles wouldn't let go. Not when he saw the same pattern emerging again: Franklin's growing interest in property development, mysterious accidents befalling those who stood in his way, and the same careful manipulation of public opinion. The winter views from his study window reminded Charles of Elizabeth. She had loved the snow, often saying it made the world look clean and new. Now, as he watched the flakes fall, he wondered what she would think of what their family had become. The photograph on his desk showed them in happier times: Elizabeth's radiant smile, Sarah's innocent laughter, and his own standing figure, before the accident took everything away. Despite his wealth, Charles lived simply. His one indulgence was his charitable work, though he kept it quiet. Anonymous donations to orphanages, scholarships for underprivileged children, support for families facing medical crises, all done without fanfare or recognition. He believed true charity needed no audience. His heart condition, worsening with age and stress, was a constant reminder of his mortality. The doctors had warned him to avoid stress, but how could he rest when he knew Franklin was still out there, potentially planning his next move? The medication bottles lined up on his nightstand told a story of a man fighting not just illness, but time itself. The servants noted how he would sometimes sit for hours in Sarah's old room, unchanged since the accident, looking through photo albums or simply sitting in silence. They didn't know he was also reviewing security footage, phone records, and financial documents, piecing together a puzzle 2 decades in the making. Recently, Charles had noticed Franklin's increased interest in a particular neighborhood, the same area where a mysterious fire had claimed the lives of a young couple, leaving their son homeless. the parallels to his own loss were too striking to ignore. His investigators had uncovered troubling connections, but nothing concrete enough to act upon. Yet, as the snow continued to fall outside his window, Charles touched the silver locket he always wore Elizabeth's last gift to him. Inside was a tiny photo of their family, a reminder of what he had lost and why he couldn't give up his quiet quest for justice. His body might be confined to a wheelchair, but his mind remained sharp, focused on one goal: preventing Franklin from destroying more lives. Little did Charles know that fate was about to send him an unexpected ally, a small boy with haunted eyes and an unshakable moral compass, who would not only help him achieve justice, but also fill the void in his heart that had remained empty for so long. Evergreen Heights stood as a testament to social disparity, where wrought iron gates and manicured lawns marked clear boundaries between the privileged and the forgotten. In winter, the contrast became even starker. Heated driveways kept snow at bay in front of million-dollar homes, while just blocks away, homeless individuals huddled in doorways, their breath forming crystals in the bitter air. The community's social hierarchy was as rigid as the ice that coated its streets. At the top sat families like the Lancasters, whose names graced hospital wings and university buildings. Among them, Hazel Thompson, president of the Neighborhood Association, wielded influence through carefully orchestrated charity galas and social events. Her daughter Zoe's birthday parties were legendary affairs, though the child herself often stood alone in crowds of purchased entertainment and imported decorations. Malcolm, Charles's head butler, embodied the complex social dynamics perfectly. Born into service, he navigated between worlds with practiced precision, commanding respect from other servants while maintaining careful deference to the elite. His perfectly pressed suits and impeccable manners masked a deep resentment of those who crossed social boundaries, particularly those who threatened the careful order he'd spent decades maintaining. The local shops along Mason Street told their own story of division. Premium boutiques and artisanal cafes occupied the North End, their windows displaying $1,000 handbags and exotic coffee beans. The South End, with its discount stores and pawn shops, served a different clientele entirely. Mrs. Chen's convenience store sat exactly between these worlds, quietly serving both populations while observing the daily dance of avoidance between them. Regular neighborhood watch meetings, held in the pristine community center, focused more on keeping undesirables out than actual safety concerns. Conversations about property values and school rankings thinly veiled deeper prejudices. But when children from the poorer districts occasionally wandered into the area, they were quickly escorted out by private security, their parents receiving stern warnings about trespassing. The local church, St. Michael's, reflected this division in its very architecture: a grand front entrance with marble steps for regular parishioners and a modest side door for those seeking assistance. Father Thomas struggled with this arrangement, but his attempts to integrate services were met with threats of reduced donations from wealthy patrons. During winter, the community's charity drove took on an almost theatrical quality. Expensive cars would pull up to donation centers, dropping off last season's designer coats with cameras flashing, while those who truly needed help were directed to facilities in more appropriate areas. The annual Winter Charity Ball, organized by Hazel, raised thousands for distant causes, while local needs went unaddressed. The Children's Park, centrally located but rarely used in winter, stood as a silent witness to the community's priorities. Its state-of-the-art equipment, funded by neighborhood association dues, remained largely untouched except during carefully scheduled playdates. Signs warning about unauthorized use kept away children from neighboring areas who might have actually enjoyed the space. Weather forecasts for this winter were particularly grim, the coldest in 5 decades. While wealthy residents discussed their upcoming ski vacations, social workers warned of insufficient shelter space for the homeless. The contrast was perhaps most visible at dawn, when luxury cars with heated seats passed by huddled figures in doorways, their drivers averting their eyes from uncomfortable realities. Even the local school system reflected these divisions. The private Evergreen Academy, with its ivy-covered walls and heated swimming pool, stood less than a mile from the underfunded public school where classrooms often went without proper heating. Children learned early about invisible but rigid boundaries, about who they could play with and who they should avoid. The community newsletter, edited by Hazel, painted a carefully curated picture of life in Evergreen Heights. Articles about garden competitions and renovation projects appeared alongside notices about maintaining community standards, coded language that everyone understood. The police blotter section invariably blamed outside elements for any disturbances, reinforcing the community's siege mentality. Yet beneath this carefully maintained facade, cracks were beginning to show. Young people like Zoe questioned their parents' prejudices. Some residents, like Mrs. Chen, quietly defied social norms through small acts of kindness. And Charles Lancaster, from his window high above it all, watched and waited, knowing that real change would require more than charity balls and social committees. Into this complex web of social dynamics and unspoken rules stumbled a small boy with a valuable briefcase, a catalyst that would soon force the community to confront its deepest prejudices and most closely held beliefs about who deserved compassion and who did not. The discovery came on the coldest morning of the year, when the thermometer outside Mrs. Chen's store read -15 degrees. Logan had been searching for shelter behind the Lancaster mansion, his fingers numb and his breath creating ice crystals on his worn scarf. That's when he saw it, a leather briefcase, half buried in fresh snow, dropped near the wheelchair ramp behind Charles's car. His first instinct was to walk away. Experience had taught him that valuable items often led to accusations, and he couldn't afford another confrontation with the police. But something about the way the briefcase lay there like a test from fate itself made him pause. Through gaps in the partially opened zipper, he glimpsed stacks of $100 bills. Logan's hands trembled as he pulled the briefcase from the snow, not just from cold but from the weight of choice pressing down on him. The money inside could change everything: proper meals, warm clothes, maybe even a room somewhere. No more huddling in doorways, no more stomach-gnawing hunger. Just the smallest stack would feed him for months. Always be honest, even when no one's watching, his mother's voice echoed in his memory. The photograph in his pocket seemed heavier suddenly, as if his parents were watching this moment, this test of their teachings. Logan looked at his reflection in a frozen puddle, gaunt face, hollow eyes, clothes that hadn't been properly washed in weeks. Inside the briefcase, beyond the cash, he found documents with Charles Lancaster's name and a small silver pocket watch with an inscription to Charles, keeper of our family's heart. The personal nature of these items made the decision both harder and easier. This wasn't just money, it was someone's story, someone's trust. Snow began falling harder as Logan stood there, warfare raging in his young heart. A nearby church bell tolled noon, reminding him that the soup kitchen would be serving soon, perhaps his only meal today. The weight of the briefcase felt like the weight of his future, pulling him between survival and integrity. Through the mansion's windows, he could see warmth and luxury that seemed from another world, a world that had judged him, condemned him, pushed him to the margins. Why shouldn't he take what fate had literally dropped at his feet? No one would know. No one would blame a freezing, starving child for choosing survival. But Logan knew he would know. His parents had raised him with an unwavering moral compass, teaching him that character was who you were when no one was watching. Even now, homeless and hungry, those lessons ran deeper than his desperation. His decision made, Logan began walking toward the mansion's front entrance, each step feeling like lead. The briefcase seemed to grow heavier, as if testing his resolve. Ahead, he could see Malcolm through the window, arranging flowers in the foyer. The butler's known disdain for street urchins made Logan's approach even more daunting. Just then, a gust of wind nearly knocked him over, sending snowflakes swirling around him like tiny dancers. For a moment, Logan thought he felt his mother's hand on his shoulder, encouraging him forward. The cold bit through his thin jacket, but his grip on the briefcase remained firm. As he reached the front steps, Logan caught his reflection in the polished door, a small, bedraggled figure clutching something far too valuable for someone of his station. The contrast between his worn shoes and the marble steps beneath them couldn't have been starker. The security camera above swiveled to face him, its red light blinking like a judgmental eye. Logan knew this moment would either validate every cruel assumption about him or prove them all wrong. His stomach growled fiercely, reminding him of the choice he was making. Still, he raised his hand to the ornate brass knocker, understanding that this single action might change his life for better or worse. The sound echoed through the mansion like a declaration, announcing not just his presence but his choice between desperate survival and determined dignity. Behind him, the winter wind howled, as if nature itself was holding its breath to see what would happen next. Logan stood straight, clutching both the briefcase and his parents' photo, ready to face whatever came through that door. In this moment, he wasn't just returning money, he was proving that even a condemned, hungry child could choose right over easy. The door began to open, and with it, the next chapter of Logan's life was about to unfold. Malcolm opened the door, his face instantly contorting with disdain at the sight of Logan. The butler's eyes darted from the boy's frost-bitten face to the expensive briefcase in his trembling hands, and his expression shifted from contempt to suspicious alarm. "Where did you get that?" Malcolm demanded, reaching for the briefcase. "I should call the police immediately." "It belongs to Mr. Lancaster," Logan replied, his voice steady despite his shivering. "I found it in the snow and wanted to return it." The commotion drew Charles to the foyer in his wheelchair, his eyes sharp with interest. Before Malcolm could respond, Charles raised his hand, silencing the butler's imminent protest. "Let the boy speak, Malcolm." Inside the warmth of the mansion, Logan's clothes began to drip melted snow onto the marble floor, earning a disapproving glare from Malcolm. But Charles wheeled closer, studying the boy with intense curiosity. When Logan explained where he'd found the briefcase and offered it without hesitation, a subtle smile crossed Charles's face. "Do you know how much money is in here?" Charles asked, opening the briefcase to reveal stacks of bills totaling $1 million. "Yes, sir," Logan answered honestly. "Enough to change my life. But it wasn't mine to keep." The response drew different reactions from the growing audience. Malcolm scoffed audibly, while several maids whispered among themselves. Through a side door, Hazel Thompson had entered, her weekly social visit perfectly timed to witness the scene. Her eyes narrowed with immediate suspicion. "Charles, surely you're not believing this." This street urchin Hazel interjected, placing a protective hand on her daughter Zoe's shoulder. "It's obviously a ploy. He probably stole it himself." But Charles raised his hand again, his expression thoughtful. "A thief wouldn't return what he's stolen, Hazel. Especially not one dying of cold and hunger." He turned to Logan. "What's your name, boy?" "Logan, sir. Logan Foster." The name sent a ripple through the room. Hazel gasped audibly. "The Foster boy." "Charles, that's the child they say burned down his own home. You can't possibly." "I didn't do it," Logan interrupted, his voice cracking slightly. "I loved my parents. I would never." He stopped, fighting back tears that threatened to freeze on his cheeks. Charles studied the boy more intently, noting how he stood straight despite his exhaustion, how he still held the briefcase out respectfully despite the accusations being hurled at him. There was something in those eyes of familiar pain, a dignity that refused to break. "Malcolm, prepare the guest room," Charles announced suddenly. "The blue one with the eastern view." The butler's jaw dropped. "Sir, you can't be serious. This boy is honest in a world that's given him every reason not to be." Charles cut in firmly. "He's cold, hungry, and alone, yet he chose integrity over survival. That says more about his character than any neighborhood gossip." Hazel stepped forward, her expensive perfume overwhelming Logan's senses. "Charles, think of your reputation. The community won't stand for this. He's dangerous, he's dangerous, he's staying," Charles stated with finality, "and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." Logan stood frozen, unable to process this turn of events. The warmth of the mansion was making him dizzy after so long in the cold. Charles noticed the boy swaying slightly and quickly instructed a maid to bring hot soup and warm clothes. Malcolm, his face a mask of barely contained outrage, reluctantly moved to follow Charles's orders. As he passed Logan, he whispered, "This isn't over, boy. People like you don't belong here." But Logan hardly heard him. His eyes were fixed on Charles, who was smiling at him with unexpected kindness. For the first time since his parents' death, someone was looking at him like a child deserving of care, rather than a criminal deserving condemnation. Through it all, young Zoe watched with fascination, ignoring her mother's attempts to pull her away. Her eyes met Logan's briefly, and she offered a small, secret smile, the first friendly gesture he'd received in months. As the mansion's residents dispersed, their whispers echoing through the grand halls, Charles remained with Logan. "Come, my boy," he said gently. "Let's get you warm. We have much to discuss." Logan followed, still clutching his parents' photograph in his pocket. Behind him, the winter wind howled against the closing door, as if marking the boundary between his past life and whatever uncertainty lay ahead. The blue guest room was larger than any space Logan had ever called his own. As he stood in the doorway, wrapped in a borrowed robe that practically swallowed him, the enormity of the change overwhelmed him. A four-poster bed with silk sheets, heavy curtains that actually kept out the cold, and a bathroom with hot running water luxuries that seemed almost unreal after months on the street. "The clothes might be a bit large," said Martha, the elderly head housekeeper, placing a stack of clean garments on the bed. Unlike Malcolm's open hostility, her attitude was one of cautious kindness. "They belonged to Master Franklin's son before he went to boarding school," she paused, studying Logan's thin frame. "We'll need to get you proper things tomorrow." Logan's first hot shower in months nearly brought him to tears. As he watched months of grime swirl down the drain, he could hear the whispered conversations in the hallway. The servants were placing bets on how long he'd last, their voices a mix of curiosity and judgment. 3 days, tops one maid wagered. Malcolm will find a way to drive him out. "Did you hear about his parents?" "The fire." "Shh, he might hear you." Later that evening, as Logan sat across from Charles at the massive dining table, the contrast between them couldn't have been starker. The boy's attempts to mimic proper table manners were met with barely concealed smirks from the staff, though Charles pretended not to notice his struggles with the multiple forks and spoons. "Tomorrow," Charles announced between courses, "we'll get you properly settled. School supplies, winter clothes." He was interrupted by the dramatic entrance of Franklin Lancaster, Charles's nephew, who burst into the dining room with the force of a winter storm. His expensive suit and perfectly coiffed hair spoke of privilege, but his eyes held something colder than the weather outside. Uncle Charles Franklin's voice dripped with false concern. "I came as soon as I heard. Surely you can't be serious about harboring this. This honest young man who returned a fortune when he could have kept it," Charles finished firmly. "Yes, I'm quite serious." Franklin's gaze swept over Logan like he was examining an insect. "Uncle, there are proper channels for helping the less fortunate. Orphanages, foster homes, where they've already rejected him based on unfounded rumors," Charles cut in. "No, Franklin? Logan stays?" The tension in the room was palpable. Logan kept his eyes on his plate, but he could feel Franklin's gaze burning into him. There was something familiar about that look, something that stirred a distant memory he couldn't quite grasp. That night, unable to sleep in the too-soft bed, Logan heard more voices in the hallway. Franklin's angry whispers carried through the thick walls. "He's obviously playing some long con, Uncle. People like him always are. Give him time, he'll show his true nature." Like how some people showed theirs 20 years ago, Charles's response was quiet but sharp, followed by silence. Logan lay awake, clutching his parents' photograph. The luxury around him felt surreal, almost threatening. Every creak of the old mansion made him jump, expecting to be thrown out at any moment. A soft knock at his door startled him. It was Zoe, sneaking past her mother's room during one of Hazel's regular evening social calls to Charles. "I brought you this," she whispered, handing him a thick blanket. "The blue room gets cold at night. Dad used to stay here before she trailed off," looking down. "Anyway, don't let Malcolm see you with it. He'll say it's stealing." Before Logan could thank her, she disappeared into the shadowy hallway, leaving him touched by this small act of kindness. The next few days established a routine. Martha would bring breakfast early, trying to teach Logan proper etiquette before Malcolm could find fault. Charles would spend mornings with him in the library, asking about his education and interests, seeming genuinely impressed by Logan's quick mind and love of reading. But there were constant reminders that not everyone welcomed his presence. Malcolm accidentally spilled hot tea on Logan's lap during lunch. Franklin made surprise visits, each time suggesting different boarding schools or youth programs far away from the mansion. Anonymous notes appeared under his door, "Leave before they remember what you did." Yet through it all, Charles remained steadfast. He seemed to take personal joy in Logan's small victories, mastering the dinner fork arrangement, learning to tie a proper tie, reciting poetry from the library's vast collection. "You remind me of someone," Charles said one evening watching Logan read by the fireplace, "someone who also refused to let the world's cruelty change their heart." Logan looked up, about to ask who, but the sadness in Charles's eyes made him stay silent. Outside, the winter storm raged on, but inside the mansion, two lonely souls began to forge a connection that would soon be tested in ways neither could imagine. For now, though, Logan had found a moment of peace, even as darker forces began plotting against this fragile new beginning. If this story has touched your heart and you believe in the power of kindness and redemption, take a moment to show your support. The small button below can make a big difference, just like how one honest action from a freezing child changed an entire community. Your like helps us share more stories of hope. The antique pocket watch vanished on a Thursday morning, exactly 3 weeks after Logan's arrival. It wasn't just any watch, it was Charles's most treasured possession, a family heirloom that had survived 3 generations. The timing couldn't have been worse, as the mansion was preparing for its annual winter charity gala. Malcolm discovered the theft during his morning rounds, his theatrical gasp drawing servants from every corner. "The watch is gone," he announced, standing in Charles's study doorway, "and I saw someone sneaking around here last night." All eyes turned to Logan, who had been quietly reading in the corner. The boy's face paled as he recognized the calculated malice in Malcolm's eyes. Before he could speak, Franklin appeared, as if by design, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Uncle Charles," Franklin said gravely, "I hate to suggest this, but perhaps we should search the boy's room. For everyone's peace of mind." Charles hesitated, his eyes meeting Logan's. The boy stood up straight, chin raised despite his trembling hands. "You can search, sir. I didn't take anything." The search party, led by Malcolm and Franklin, made a show of turning Logan's room upside down. The other servants watched from the doorway, their whispers growing louder with each passing minute. Then came Malcolm's triumphant cry as he lifted the mattress. There lay the watch, its gold surface gleaming accusingly. "I didn't put it there," Logan's voice cracked with desperation. "Someone's trying to frame me." "Just like you didn't start the fire," Franklin asked softly, his words carrying through the suddenly silent room. "How many times will you deny your true nature, boy?" Charles wheeled himself forward, his face unreadable. The disappointment in his eyes cut Logan deeper than any accusation. "Logan, I gave you a chance when others wouldn't. I trusted you." "Mr. Charles, please." Logan reached for his coat pocket, pulling out the worn photograph of his parents. "I swear on their memory, I didn't take it. I would never." "That's enough," Malcolm interrupted. "Sir, shall I call the police?" The gathered crowd held their breath. Even Hazel, who had arrived mid-commotion, stood silent for once. Young Zoe pushed through the adults, her face flushed with anger. He couldn't have done it. I saw, but her mother's firm hand on her shoulder silenced her. Charles raised his hand, and the room fell silent. "No police," he said finally, "but Logan, I need time to think. Please stay in your room until I decide what to do." As the crowd dispersed, Malcolm's triumphant smirk and Franklin's satisfied nod went unnoticed by all except Logan. He caught a glimpse of Zoe trying to tell him something, but Hazel quickly pulled her away. Alone in his room, Logan sat on the stripped bed, his parents' photograph clutched tightly. The watch incident brought back painful memories of the fire investigation, the same disbelieving faces, the same predetermined guilt. Through his window he could see snowflakes falling, each one a reminder of how quickly warmth could turn to coldness. Hours passed. The mansion's sounds changed as day turned to evening. Dinner was served, dishes clinked, conversations hummed. No one brought him food. The only interruption was Malcolm, delivering fresh sheets with exaggerated caution, as if Logan might snatch them too. "Enjoying your last night in luxury," the butler whispered. "It's where you belong, you know. Out there in the cold with the other thieves." Logan didn't respond. His mind was racing, trying to understand who had orchestrated this and why. The watch's placement was too perfect, the timing too convenient, but proving his innocence seemed impossible, just like with the fire. As night fell, he heard Franklin's voice outside his door, speaking to Charles. "Uncle, I know it's hard, but we must face facts. Some people simply cannot rise above their circumstances. Better to learn this now than when something more valuable goes missing." Logan pressed his hands against his ears, trying to block out the words that echoed his deepest fears. The warmth and acceptance he'd found here had been too good to be true. Perhaps this was his fate, to be forever judged by assumptions and prejudices. But as he touched the photograph in his pocket, his mother's words came back to him. Truth has a way of surfacing, like air bubbles in water. Stay true to yourself, and eventually it will rise. Little did Logan know that truth would surface sooner than he expected, though not before his world would be shaken to its very foundation. That night, as the mansion settled into uneasy silence, a soft tapping at Logan's window startled him awake. There stood Zoe, perched precariously on a snow-covered ledge, her breath fogging the glass. Her determination to reach his third-floor room spoke volumes about her character. "I saw them," she whispered urgently after Logan helped her inside. "Malcolm and my mother's housemaid. They were planning something in the servants' corridor yesterday. I tried to tell you earlier, but Mom wouldn't let me near you." Logan stared at her, torn between hope and caution. "Why are you helping me? Your mother would be furious." "Because," Zoe replied, pulling her knees to her chest as she settled on the floor, "I know what it's like when nobody believes you. When they've already decided who you are." Her eyes carried a sadness that seemed too heavy for her 12 years. She explained how she'd overheard more than just plans about the watch. Franklin had been meeting secretly with her mother, discussing property developments and old land deeds. Something about Logan's presence threatening their plans. "But that's not why I'm really helping," Zoe continued, her voice dropping lower. "The night of the fire. I was there, in our garden. I saw someone leaving your house, but Mom made me promise never to tell. She said it would complicate things." Logan's heart nearly stopped. "Who? Did you see their face?" Before Zoe could answer, footsteps echoed in the hallway. She quickly slipped behind the heavy curtains as Malcolm's shadow passed beneath the door. Both children held their breath until the footsteps faded. "I have to go," Zoe whispered. "But I'll help prove your innocence. We just need evidence." Over the next few days, while Logan remained confined to his room, Zoe became his secret ally. She would leave notes hidden in library books that Martha would bring him, sharing snippets of conversations she'd overheard. She snuck him extra food when Malcolm deliberately forgot his meals. Their friendship grew stronger through these secret exchanges. Zoe confided how lonely she felt. Despite her privileged life, her mother's constant social obligations leaving her essentially alone. Logan shared stories of his parents, the happy memories he clung to despite everyone trying to taint them. "Sometimes I dream about the fire," he admitted one night during another secret visit. "I keep trying to reach their door, but the handle gets further away. I hear them calling, but..." Zoe reached out and squeezed his hand. "We'll find the truth. I promise." Their alliance didn't go unnoticed. Hazel began restricting Zoe's movements, scheduling extra tutoring sessions and supervised activities, but Zoe proved remarkably resourceful, creating elaborate excuses to visit the mansion with her mother. One afternoon, she managed to slip Logan a small notebook. "I've been keeping track of when Franklin visits and what I overhear. Something big is happening soon. They keep talking about papers Charles needs to sign." The risk Zoe took in helping him wasn't lost on Logan. Why risk getting in trouble? Your mother would never forgive you. Zoe's answer came with surprising maturity, because sometimes doing what's right means going against what's easy. "You taught me that when you returned the briefcase." Their friendship became a bright spot in Logan's darkest hours. When doubts crept in, when the weight of accusations became too heavy, Zoe's unwavering belief in his innocence gave him strength. She saw him not as the fireboy or the street urchin, but simply as Logan, someone worthy of trust and friendship. One evening, as snow fell heavily outside, Zoe brought him news that made his blood run cold. "They're planning something for the charity gala. I heard Franklin say it's time to resolve the Charles situation, Logan. I'm scared for him." Their eyes met in the dim light, both understanding the gravity of the situation. They were no longer just two kids fighting against unfair accusations. They were possibly the only ones who could prevent something terrible from happening. "We need to warn him," Logan whispered. "They'll never believe," just as Zoe replied. "We need proof." As they sat there, plotting in whispers, their unlikely friendship represented everything the adults around them fought against: the breaking down of social barriers, the triumph of truth over prejudice, the simple power of believing in someone when the whole world doubted them. In the library, Charles sat alone in his wheelchair, staring at the recovered pocket watch. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right with him. 20 years of investigating Franklin had taught him to recognize the signs of manipulation, and this incident carried his nephew's signature too perfectly. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Martha entered, carrying evening tea, so she hesitated, then continued, "Might I speak freely about the boy?" Charles nodded, noting the unusual concern in his longtime housekeeper's face. "Last night I saw something peculiar." Mr. Franklin and Malcolm in the service corridor, laughing. Malcolm said something about the watch working better than expected. "I wouldn't normally speak ill, but..." Charles's eyes narrowed. "Thank you, Martha. Please send Logan to me." When Logan entered, his usual confident posture was gone, replaced by the defensive slouch of someone expecting another blow. Charles studied him carefully, remembering another young person who had once stood before him, similarly accused his late daughter Sarah, framed for stealing by Franklin when they were children. Logan, Charles began, wheeling closer. "Tell me again about the night of the fire." The question caught Logan off guard. "Sir." "Not what others say happened. Tell me what you remember." Logan's voice trembled as he recounted that terrible night. "I smelled smoke first, tried to reach their room, but the door was locked from outside. I heard voices downstairs, unfamiliar ones. Then someone pushed me out a window. I saw. I saw a man in an expensive coat running through our garden. Charles's grip tightened on his armrests. An expensive coat, like the one Franklin always wears. Logan's eyes widened with sudden recognition. You know something? I know my nephew, Charles replied grimly, and I know how he operates. The watch incident, it's too perfect, too convenient. Just like he paused, pain flickering across his face, just like when my wife and daughter died. The revelation hung in the air between them. Logan felt his heart racing as Charles continued, 20 years ago, my family died in what everyone called an accident. Black ice, they said. But the brake lines were cut. Franklin needed control of the company, you see. Elizabeth and Sarah stood in his way. Like my parents stood in his way, Logan whispered, pieces falling into place. Our house, it was the last one he needed for his development project. Charles reached for Logan's hand, his grip firm and reassuring. I've been investigating him for years, gathering evidence. But he's careful, always working through others. Until now. The charity gala, Logan blurted out. Zoe overheard. Zoe's been helping you, Charles interrupted, a slight smile touching his lips. Good girl, she's braver than her mother. Logan explained everything. Zoe had discovered, the secret meetings, the papers Charles was supposed to sign, the ominous plans for the gala. With each word, Charles's expression grew more determined. Listen carefully. Charles leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Franklin doesn't know I suspect him. That's our advantage. But we need proof, concrete evidence that links him to both the fire and his current schemes. You believe me? Logan's voice cracked with emotion. I believed in you the moment you returned that briefcase, Charles replied. A child who chooses honesty over survival, who maintains dignity despite cruelty. The child deserves trust. But more than that, I recognize in you the same strength I saw in my Sarah. Tears welled in Logan's eyes as Charles continued, we'll need to be careful. Franklin's desperate now. The development project's deadline is approaching, and my refusal to sell certain properties has him cornered. You and Zoe will be my eyes and ears. But Malcolm will continue thinking he's won. Sometimes Logan, appearing defeated, is the best way to fight back. Charles's eyes twinkled with renewed purpose. Now go back to your room. Act subdued, broken. Let them think their plan is working. As Logan turned to leave, Charles called after him softly, and Logan, thank you for giving an old man reason to fight again. That night, as snow fell outside his window, Logan felt something he hadn't since his parents' death. Hope. In his pocket, he clutched both his parents' photograph and a new ally, a small key Charles had secretly passed him, one that would unlock the truth hidden in Franklin's private study. The mansion creaked and settled around him, but for the first time these sounds didn't feel threatening. Instead, they seemed to whisper of justice approaching, of truths waiting to be unveiled, of a family forming in the most unexpected way. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, but tonight Logan slept peacefully, knowing he was no longer alone in his fight for truth. The morning of the frozen pond incident dawned brutally cold. Temperatures had plunged to record lows, turning the mansion's ornamental pond into a treacherous sheet of ice. Warning signs had been posted, but Zoe, in her determination to gather evidence about Franklin, ventured too close to the pond's edge while following her mother to a secret meeting. The ice cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Logan, who had been watching from his window, saw Zoe disappear through the surface. Without hesitation, he bolted from his room, ignoring Malcolm's shouts to stop. The bitter cold hit him like a physical blow as he ran outside, but he didn't slow down. Hazel's screams pierced the air, my baby. Someone help her, but the gathered crowd, including Malcolm and several servants, stood frozen in horror. The ice was too thin to support an adult's weight. Logan didn't hesitate. He dropped to his stomach and began sliding across the ice, distributing his weight as his father had once taught him during happier winters. The freezing surface burned through his thin clothes, but he kept moving toward the broken edge where Zoe had disappeared. "Get back, you fool," Franklin's voice carried across the pond. "You'll kill yourself too." But Logan had already reached the hole. Taking a deep breath, he plunged his arms into the frigid water. The cold was like thousands of knives stabbing his skin. He couldn't feel his fingers, but he kept reaching, searching. Then contact. Zoe's coat. Logan pulled with all his strength, but the waterlogged weight was too much. His body screamed for warmth, for air, for relief from the crushing cold. Black spots danced in his vision. "I won't let go," he whispered through chattering teeth. "I won't lose anyone else." With one final surge of desperate strength, he managed to pull Zoe's head above water. Her lips were blue, her eyes closed. The ice around them creaked ominously. "Hold on," Charles's voice cut through the chaos. He had ordered the gardeners to bring rope, creating a human chain to reach them. But Logan knew they wouldn't make it in time. The ice was splintering beneath them. Making a split-second decision, Logan wrapped his arms around Zoe and rolled them both away from the weakening edge, using his body to protect her from the rough ice. Each roll sent daggers of pain through his frozen limbs, but he kept going until they reached thicker ice. Hands reached for them, pulling them to safety. Logan's consciousness was fading, but he refused to let go of Zoe until he heard her cough, expelling water. "She's breathing," someone shouted. Through blurry vision, Logan saw Hazel collapse beside her daughter, sobbing. The next few minutes were chaos. Blankets appeared, wrapping around their shivering bodies. Charles ordered both children brought inside immediately. But as servants carried them in, Logan caught a glimpse of Franklin's face, a mixture of frustration and calculated concern that seemed oddly out of place. "Get them to the fire," Charles commanded, taking charge. "Martha, bring hot tea and call the doctor." In the warmth of the library, as feeling painfully returned to his frozen limbs, Logan heard scattered conversations around him. "Did you see how he didn't even think twice? Just like that, straight into danger. Maybe we were wrong about him? On the fire? Could we have been mistaken?" Hazel, still holding Zoe close, looked at Logan with tears in her eyes. "You saved her," she whispered. "After everything I said about you, everything I believed, you saved my daughter." Zoe, though still shivering, managed to speak. "He's not who you thought. Mother, he never was." The gathered crowd shifted uncomfortably, years of prejudice warring with the undeniable evidence of Logan's character they had just witnessed. Even Malcolm seemed unsure, his usual disdain cracking slightly. Charles watched it all with knowing eyes. Sometimes, he announced to the room, it takes a moment of crisis to reveal a person's true nature. Logan didn't stop to think about who believed in him or who doubted him. He simply acted to save a life. Franklin, standing in the doorway, interjected smoothly. "Yes, very heroic. But shouldn't we focus on getting the children proper medical attention rather than turning this into a moral lesson?" But the damage to Franklin's carefully constructed narrative was done. The community's perception had shifted, if only slightly. As Logan finally gave in to exhaustion, he heard Charles addressing the crowd. "Look at these two children, one from privilege, one from hardship, both showing us what really matters. While we adults played our social games, they showed us true courage and friendship." Logan's last conscious thought was of his parents' photograph still in his frozen coat pocket. "I didn't let anyone else die," he whispered. "I kept my promise." The winter sun broke through the clouds outside, casting a warm glow through the library windows, as if nature itself was acknowledging that something had changed in Evergreen Heights that day. The ice that had formed around people's hearts began to thaw, much like the treacherous pond outside. In the days following the pond incident, while Logan recovered from hypothermia, Zoe made a discovery that would change everything. Confined to bed but determined to help, she overheard a heated conversation between Franklin and her mother through the mansion's old heating vents. "The development deadline is in 2 weeks," Franklin's voice carried clearly. "If Charles doesn't sign those power of attorney papers at the gala, we lose everything. The land deals, the offshore accounts, all of it." "Including the Foster property?" Hazel asked. "Especially that. Do you think I arranged that convenient accident for nothing? But that brat survived, and now he's becoming a problem. Charles is getting too attached." But the sound of something shattering, likely Franklin's whiskey glass, echoed through the vent. "Keep your voice down," Hazel hissed. "These walls have ears." "Don't lecture me about caution," Franklin snapped. "I've spent 20 years building this plan. First Elizabeth and Sarah's accident, now the Foster fire, everything perfectly orchestrated. I won't let some street urchin's honesty ruin it all." Zoe, her hands trembling, recorded everything on her phone, but as she shifted position, her elbow knocked a book from her nightstand. The thud drew immediate silence from below. "Check the upper floor," Franklin ordered. "Now." Footsteps thundered up the stairs. Zoe quickly slipped her phone under her pillow just as Malcolm burst in, his face a mask of suspicion. "Just checking on your recovery, Miss Thompson," he said smoothly, eyes scanning the room, "though you seem agitated." "The fever," Zoe lied, forcing a weak cough. "Makes it hard to rest." Meanwhile, in Charles's study, Logan was sharing his own discoveries. The key Charles had given him had led to a locked drawer in Franklin's desk, containing documents that painted a damning picture. Property deeds, Logan explained, spreading papers across Charles's desk. All the houses that had accidents over the past 20 years, each one needed for Franklin's development project, including. His voice caught my home. Charles examined the documents, his face growing darker. The pattern is clear, but Franklin's clever nothing here directly links him to the fires. "But there's more," Logan continued, pulling out a worn notebook. "I found this in the same drawer. It's like a diary, but in code. Look at the dates. One matches the night my parents, the night of our fire." Charles took the notebook with trembling hands. The same code he used as a child. "Sarah and I. We used to joke about his secret messages." His voice cracked slightly at the memory. Before they could discuss further, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Zoe burst in, pale and breathless, Malcolm close behind. "Sir, I apologize," Malcolm began. "Miss Thompson should be resting." "I heard them," Zoe interrupted. "Franklin and my mother. I recorded everything." Malcolm's face went ashen. He moved to grab Zoe's arm, but Logan stepped between them, his stance protective despite still being weak from his bout with hypothermia. "Let her speak," Charles commanded. As Zoe played the recording, Malcolm's composure crumbled. The butler sank into a chair, his face a mixture of horror and guilt. "All these years," he whispered, "I helped him, believed his lies about protecting the family legacy. But the fire. Children, I never thought." Charles faced his longtime butler. "It's not too late to make it right, Malcolm. What do you know?" Malcolm looked between Charles and the children, years of loyalty warring with emerging conscience. Finally, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small notebook. "I kept records," he said quietly. "Times, dates, conversations, insurance payments. I thought I was protecting the family's interests. But after seeing Master Logan risk his life for Miss Zoe." He placed the notebook on Charles's desk. "Everything's here." The room fell silent as Charles examined Malcolm's meticulous notes. Outside, snow began falling again, as if nature was trying to blanket the ugly truths being uncovered. "The gala," Logan said suddenly. "Franklin's planning something for the gala. That's when he wants you to sign the papers." Not just papers, Malcolm added, his voice steadying with resolve. He has other plans. More permanent solutions, he called them. Your heart condition, sir. He has someone who can make it look natural. Charles's hands gripped his wheelchair arms. So that's his endgame. Remove me, blame the shock on Logan's presence, and take control of everything. We have to stop him, Zoe exclaimed. We will, Charles replied, his voice hard with determination. But we must be careful. Franklin's desperate now, and desperate men are dangerous. Logan touched his coat pocket, feeling his parents' photograph. Like the night of the fire, he said quietly. He was desperate then too. Malcolm stood, straightening his uniform. Sir, with your permission, I'd like to continue playing my role. Let Franklin think I'm still his ally. It might give us an advantage. Charles nodded. Agreed, but no one else can know what we've discovered. Not yet. The gala is in 3 days. Until then, we act normal. As they formulated their plan, none of them noticed the shadow that briefly darkened the study's doorway or heard the soft footsteps retreating down the hallway. In his room, Franklin opened his safe and removed a small vial, smiling coldly. So, dear uncle, you want to play detective? Let's see how well you investigate from a hospital bed. The 3 days leading up to the gala became a dangerous dance of pretense. The mansion buzzed with preparations, but beneath the festive surface, a deadly game was unfolding. Every cup of tea could be poisoned. Every casual conversation could be a trap. Franklin increased his presence at the mansion, playing the role of concerned nephew perfectly. Uncle Charles, he'd say loudly for all to hear, you're looking tired. Perhaps we should postpone the gala. His solicitous tone masked the threat in his eyes. Logan and Zoe developed a silent communication system, exchanging information through borrowed library books and coded messages left in plain sight. They noticed Franklin watching them constantly, his pleasant smile never reaching his cold eyes. Even their friendship had become a weapon in this silent war. Anytime they were seen together, Hazel would create a scene about proper associations. The boy may have saved my daughter, she'd announced to anyone within earshot, but that doesn't change who he is. Some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. The pressure began showing on everyone. Malcolm's hands trembled slightly when serving tea, knowing each cup could be the one Franklin had tampered with. He'd developed a system of switching Charles's cups when no one was looking, but the strain of constant vigilance was taking its toll. 2 days before the gala, Logan overheard a chilling conversation while hiding in the mansion's service corridors. Everything's prepared, Franklin's voice. Yes, sir. The doctor's been paid. He'll certify it as natural causes, an unfamiliar voice. And the boy. An unfortunate accident during the confusion. Grief-stricken, he'll run away. No one will look too hard. Logan's blood ran cold, but he forced himself to remain still, gathering every detail. When he reported back to Charles, the old man's face grew grave. They're moving faster than we expected, Charles said, carefully placing his untouched tea aside. Malcolm reported Franklin making late-night calls to my cardiologist. They're building a medical narrative to support whatever they're planning. That evening, during dinner, Franklin staged his first test. He proposed a toast to Charles, watching intently as everyone raised their glasses. Logan noticed Zoe's slight head shake. She'd seen something added to Charles's wine. Charles, understanding the warning, pretended to drink while actually letting the liquid fall into his napkin. The tension peaked the night before the gala. Logan woke to the sound of breaking glass, followed by muffled voices. Creeping to his door, he heard Malcolm confronting someone in the hallway. Mr. Franklin, this goes too far. Malcolm's usually composed voice shook. Murder is? Murder, Franklin laughed softly. Like what you helped cover up 20 years ago? Don't develop a conscience now, Malcolm. You're in too deep. Logan held his breath, recording the conversation on the phone Charles had given him. Each word was another piece of evidence, but also a reminder of how dangerous their situation had become. The next morning, final preparations for the gala were interrupted by an unexpected visit from the police. Franklin had reported concerns about Logan's presence, citing the old fire investigation. The officers, clearly paid off, made a show of questioning the boy. Just routine, they claimed, but their hostile tone revealed their true purpose: intimidation. Charles intervened, his voice carrying the weight of his influence. "Gentlemen, are you suggesting that the boy who risked his life to save Zoe Thompson is a threat? Perhaps we should discuss this at your precinct, with my lawyers present." The officers backed down, but the message was clear: Franklin was tightening the noose. As evening approached, Logan found Zoe crying in the library. "He threatened my mother," she whispered. Franklin told her if she doesn't help him, he'll reveal her role in covering up what happened to your parents. "She's scared, Logan. I've never seen her scared before." The revelation added another layer to their already complex situation. Hazel, for all her prejudices, was also a victim of Franklin's manipulation. The web of lies and threats had ensnared everyone. Charles called a final secret meeting in his study hours before the gala. Malcolm secured the room while Logan and Zoe shared their latest discoveries. "Remember," Charles instructed, "whatever happens tonight, stick to the plan. Franklin expects us to be reactive, defensive. Instead, we'll be ready." But what if he really tries to? Logan couldn't finish the sentence. Charles squeezed his hand. "Son, I've spent 20 years waiting for justice. Whether I survive tonight or not, the truth will come out. You and Zoe have made sure of that." The grandfather clock struck 6, its chimes echoing through the mansion like a countdown. Guests would begin arriving in an hour. Somewhere in the house, Franklin was surely making his final preparations. Logan touched his parents' photograph, then looked at Charles with determination. "We won't let him win. Not this time." As they left the study to prepare for the evening, none of them saw the tiny camera Franklin had hidden in the bookshelf, or knew that their entire conversation had been transmitted to his phone. In his private room, Franklin watched the recording, his face twisted with rage and triumph. "So, Uncle Charles, you want to play games?" He opened his safe, removing not just the vial of poison, but also a gun. "Let's see how your little family handles a change in plans." The winter gala transformed the Lancaster mansion into a glittering display of wealth and power. Snow fell softly outside, while inside, crystal chandeliers cast rainbow shadows over guests in designer evening wear. The air hummed with classical music and practiced laughter, masking the deadly tension building beneath the surface. Logan, dressed in a tailored suit that Charles had insisted on, watched from his position near the grand staircase. Every detail felt significant: the way Franklin kept touching his jacket pocket, Hazel's nervous glances toward her daughter, Malcolm's subtle nod as he served champagne. The pieces were in place for their plan, but also for Franklin's. Charles made his entrance precisely at 8, wheeling himself into the grand hall. His appearance drew genuine gasps. He looked decades older than just days before, his face pale and drawn. The theatrical display of weakness was part of their strategy, but Logan noticed real pain flashing across his face when he thought no one was watching. Franklin swooped in immediately, playing the concerned nephew. "Uncle Charles, you don't look well at all. Perhaps we should handle the business matters quickly, so you can rest." His solicitous tone carried an undercurrent of triumph. "Yes," Charles agreed weakly. "In my study, perhaps. Just let me catch my breath." Logan watched them disappear down the hallway, every instinct screaming to follow. But he had his own role to play. Moving carefully through the crowd, he positioned himself near the library entrance, waiting for Zoe's signal. The first part of Franklin's plan revealed itself within minutes. The family doctor, clearly in Franklin's pocket, began speaking loudly about Charles's declining health. "Such a shame," he announced to anyone who would listen. "His mind's going too, you know. paranoid delusions, taking in street children, making wild accusations. Right on cue, Hazel joined in, though Logan could see her hands shaking. Indeed, just yesterday he was rambling about conspiracies. Perhaps it's time someone else managed the estate's affairs. The crowd murmured sympathetically, years of social conditioning making them eager to believe the worst about someone who had challenged their prejudices. Logan felt his anger rising but forced himself to stay focused. A subtle movement caught his eye. Zoe, slipping away from her mother's grip, heading toward the prearranged position. But something was wrong. Franklin's hired security men were moving too, cutting off escape routes Logan hadn't even known existed. Then he heard it, Charles's voice, raised in genuine alarm, cutting through the party's elegant facade. "Franklin, put that down." The music screeched to a halt. Guests froze mid-conversation as the sound of breaking glass echoed from the study. Logan broke from his position, heart pounding, knowing they'd miscalculated somehow. He reached the study door just as Franklin's voice rang out, all pretense abandoned. 20 years, Franklin was shouting. 20 years of playing the dutiful nephew, watching you waste our family's fortune on charity cases, and lost causes the sound of something heavy hitting wood, a gun being placed on a desk. "Sign the papers, Uncle." "Make this easy." Logan burst through the door to find a scene straight from his nightmares. Charles was backed against the window, his wheelchair knocked aside. Franklin stood over him, one hand holding a gun, the other gripping a familiar leather briefcase. "Ah, perfect timing," Franklin sneered, seeing Logan. "Our little hero arrives. Tell me, boy, did you really think returning that briefcase would change anything? Some people are born to nothing, and that's where they should stay." "Like my parents stayed in our burning house," Logan's voice shook with rage, "while you watched from our garden." Franklin's laugh was cold. "Clever child. But you have no proof. No one will believe." "We believe him." Zoe's voice came from the doorway. She stood there, phone raised, live streaming everything to the screens in the main hall. Behind her, dozens of guests crowded the corridor, witnessing Franklin's true nature. But Franklin's smile didn't fade. If anything, it grew colder. "You think this changes anything? I've spent 20 years building this moment. Every detail planned, every contingency covered." He reached into the briefcase, pulling out a stack of papers, including this evidence that our young hero here actually did start the fire that killed his parents, all properly backdated and witnessed. Charles struggled to rise, his face contorted with pain that was no longer just for show. "Franklin, stop this madness." "Madness," Franklin's voice rose hysterically. "Madness is watching you throw away everything our family built. Elizabeth and Sarah understood that, or they would have if they'd lived. The foster boy's parents understood too in their final moments." The confession hung in the air like smoke. In the doorway, Malcolm stepped forward, his own phone recording. "Mr. Franklin, you should know I've been recording everything. Not just tonight, but for years. Every conversation, every threat, every detail of what really happened to Mrs. Elizabeth and Miss Sarah." Franklin's composure cracked. The gun swung wildly between targets. "Charles, Logan, Malcolm, Zoe, you're lying. You've always been loyal to me." "My loyalty was to this family," Malcolm replied steadily. "I lost sight of that once. Never again." But Franklin wasn't finished. His free hand dove into his pocket, emerging with a small vial. "You think recordings will matter when you're all dead? A tragic murder-suicide, the disturbed boy, the failing uncle, all those unresolved issues." Logan saw him moving before anyone else, saw his finger tightening on the trigger. Without thinking, he launched himself forward, just as his father had once launched toward a burning door. The gun roared, crystal glasses shattered, and someone screamed. In the chaos that followed, no one noticed the small photograph that fell from Logan's pocket, landing face up on the Persian carpet, a family's last happy moment, preserved in time, waiting to bear witness to justice. The hospital corridor's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows over the gathered crowd. Blood stained Logan's suit jacket where the bullet had grazed his shoulder, but he refused to leave Charles's side. The elderly man lay unconscious in the emergency room, doctors working frantically after his collapse during the confrontation. BP dropping a nurse called out, "Doctor, he's not stabilizing." Logan pressed his face against the observation window, his breath fogging the glass. Behind him, Zoe gripped his uninjured arm, both children watching as machines beeped ominously and medical staff rushed around Charles's still form. "He has to make it," Logan whispered. "He has to know we got the proof." The police had taken Franklin away in handcuffs, his final desperate act thwarted when Malcolm knocked the poison vial from his hand. But the stress had triggered something in Charles's heart, a massive cardiac event that threatened to accomplish what Franklin's schemes could not. Hazel paced the waiting room, her carefully maintained facade crumbling. "This is my fault too," she kept muttering. I knew, and I said nothing. All these years." Malcolm stood guard at the door, his butler's posture unchanged despite everything. His phone contained the evidence that would bury Franklin forever, but right now none of that mattered. The man he'd served for decades, whom he'd finally chosen to protect, was fighting for his life. A doctor emerged, his face grave. "The next few hours are critical. The damage to his heart is severe, if he makes it through the night." When Logan interrupted firmly, "When he makes it through the night?" The doctor's expression softened, looking at the boy. "He's asking for you." Inside the room, Charles looked small against the white hospital sheets. Tubes and wires connected him to softly beeping machines. His eyes fluttered open as Logan approached. "Did we get him?" Charles whispered. Logan nodded, fighting back tears. "Everything's recorded. Malcolm's talking to the police now. Franklin confessed to everything, my parents, your family." Charles managed a weak smile. Then it was worth it. All of it, his hand trembled as he reached for Logan's. "I need you to know. The adoption papers, they're in my desk." "No," Logan cut him off, gripping Charles's hand tighter. "You can tell me about them tomorrow, and the next day. You're not going anywhere." The monitors suddenly erupted in alarm. Charles's hand went slack as his eyes rolled back. Medical staff rushed in, pushing Logan aside. "Code blue," someone shouted. "Starting compressions." Logan found himself in the hallway, watching through the window as they fought to restart Charles's heart. Zoe appeared beside him, slipping her hand into his. Clear, the doctor's voice was muffled through the glass. Charles's body jerked with the defibrillator's shock. No response. Again. Clear. Logan pressed his parents' photograph against the window, as if they could somehow help. "Please," he whispered. "I can't lose another family." "Not again." More doctors rushed in. Words like critical and failing filtered through the door. Logan felt his world narrowing to the rhythmic sound of compressions and the flat tone of the heart monitor. Suddenly, Malcolm's voice cut through the chaos. "Let me through. I have his medical records. There's something you need to see." The butler pushed past security, clutching a file, his medication. Franklin was having it replaced. The doctor was in on its slow-acting poison designed to mimic heart failure. Everything shifted into high gear. New medications were rushed in. The antidote, Malcolm explained, had been part of Franklin's plan. He'd intended to save Charles at the last minute, proving his devotion while taking control. Minutes stretched like hours. Logan didn't move from the window, his forehead pressed against the cool glass. Around him, he was vaguely aware of more people arriving, police taking statements, reporters trying to get in, society figures drawn by the scandal. Then, finally, a sound cut through everything else, the steady beep of a normal heart rhythm. "He's stabilizing," the doctor announced, relief evident in his voice. "The antidote's working." Logan's knees gave out. Zoe caught him before he could fall, and for the first time since his parents' death, he let himself cry not from sadness or fear, but from pure relief. Hours passed. Police came and went, taking statements. News broke about Franklin's arrest, about the years of manipulation and murder, but Logan noticed something else too: the way hospital staff stopped avoiding his gaze, how visitors nodded respectfully instead of shrinking away. Dawn was breaking when Charles finally opened his eyes properly. The room had emptied except for Logan, who'd refused to leave. "You know," Charles said weakly, "I had a whole speech prepared about family and trust, but I think we've moved beyond needing words, haven't we?" Logan smiled through his tears. "Way beyond." Still, Charles continued, his voice growing stronger, "There are those adoption papers to discuss." Outside the window, snow had started falling again. But this time it felt less like nature's indifference, and more like a cleansing, washing away old prejudices, old pain, old barriers between people. In his pocket, Logan's parents smiled from their photograph, and for the first time he felt like they were truly at peace. Their son hadn't just survived, he'd found a way to thrive, to bring justice, to build a new family while honoring their memory. The day after Charles stabilized, the truth exploded across every news outlet in the city. Lancaster heir's 20-year reign of terror exposed screamed the headlines. Police evidence photos showed the hidden camera in Franklin's study, the doctored documents, the vials of poison each piece, revealing a deeper layer of calculated evil. But it was Malcolm's records that proved most damaging. The butler's meticulous documentation detailed years of manipulation, blackmail, and murder. His testimony, delivered in the hospital's conference room to avoid leaving Charles, painted a picture that left even hardened detectives shaken. The night of the Foster fire, Malcolm recounted, his voice steady but his hands trembling. Franklin ensured all security cameras in the area were disabled. He had already purchased the surrounding properties through shell companies. The Foster house was the last piece he needed. Logan sat beside Charles's bed, listening as the man described his parents' last moments. Mr. Foster discovered something in the property records, irregularities that pointed to Franklin's scheme. He tried to warn others. That's when Franklin decided they had to go. Hazel, who had come to give her own statement, broke down completely. "I saw him leaving their garden that night," she admitted, avoiding Logan's gaze. He threatened Zoe, said if I ever spoke up, my daughter would suffer the same fate. I was a coward. I chose my child's safety over justice for yours. The room fell silent. Logan felt Charles's hand squeeze his shoulder, grounding him as the truth of his parents' death finally emerged from the shadows of suspicion and lies. "But why Elizabeth and Sarah?" someone asked. "Why kill your own family?" Malcolm's answer chilled the room. Mrs. Elizabeth had discovered Franklin's earliest schemes: property fraud, insurance scams. Miss Sarah, she witnessed him tampering with the car. They had to be eliminated before they could expose him. Charles closed his eyes, tears rolling down his cheeks. 20 years of suspicion finally confirmed, the weight of certainty somehow heavier than doubt had been. More revelations followed. The family doctor confessed to falsifying death certificates. Security guards admitted to destroying evidence. Each confession exposed how deeply Franklin's corruption had penetrated their community. But perhaps most shocking was the discovery in Franklin's private safe, a journal dating back to his teenage years. Its pages revealed a psychopath's evolution, documenting his growing belief that he alone deserved the Lancaster fortune. "Power isn't inherited," he'd written. "It's taken. The weak don't deserve wealth or position. They must be eliminated." The entries about Logan were particularly disturbing. Franklin had recognized something in the boy, the same unwavering moral strength he'd seen and hated in his Aunt Elizabeth. Logan's return of the briefcase hadn't been just an inconvenience, it had been a direct challenge to Franklin's worldview. As police led Franklin from his holding cell to face charges, reporters captured his final, unhinged rant, "You're all blind." That street rat and that foolish old man, they're destroying everything our class built. Order must be maintained. The right people must remain in power." His words, broadcast across every news channel, forced the community to confront its own complicity. How many had looked away? How many had chosen comfortable lies over uncomfortable truth? In Charles's hospital room, Logan watched the coverage with mixed emotions. "He really hated me," he said quietly. "Not just what I did, but what I represented." "You represented everything he couldn't understand," Charles replied. "Integrity that couldn't be bought. Strength that came from character, not position. You were living proof that his entire worldview was wrong." Zoe, who had barely left Logan's side through all of this, added, "You changed everything. Not just by exposing Franklin, but by showing us all our own prejudices." The evidence mounted hourly. Cold cases were reopened. Other families came forward with stories of mysterious accidents and convenient deaths. Franklin's web of destruction had stretched far beyond the Lancaster family. But amidst the dark revelations, light began to shine through. The community, shocked by its own blind spots, started to change. The same society matrons who had once crossed the street to avoid Logan now brought food to the hospital. Their children, freed from inherited prejudices, sought out Zoe and Logan's friendship. Even Malcolm, though helping prosecutors build their case, found a kind of redemption. His years of detailed record-keeping, initially done out of misguided loyalty, became the key to securing justice. "I chose the wrong side for too long," he told Logan one evening. "But watching you, your courage, your integrity helped me remember what true loyalty means." As winter began to soften towards spring, truth continued to emerge like flowers through melting snow. Each revelation helped heal old wounds, bridge old divides, and build new understanding. The photograph of Logan's parents, slightly singed but intact, now sat framed beside Charles's hospital bed, a reminder that justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. If this story of justice, redemption, and the triumph of truth has touched your heart, take a moment to show your support. Like the small act of kindness that began Logan's journey, your simple click on the like button helps share this message of hope with others who need to hear it. No one expected Franklin's final act of vengeance to come from behind bars. 3 weeks after his arrest, as Charles was preparing to return home from the hospital, the carefully orchestrated facade shattered. It began with a simple envelope, delivered to the mansion by Franklin's lawyer. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a property deed Logan instantly recognized. It was for his old family home, the one that had burned. But it was what was scribbled in the margins that made his blood run cold. Some fires never really go out. Within hours, reports started flooding in. Small fires were breaking out across the city, targeting properties connected to the Lancaster estate. Franklin's hidden network, activated by some pre-arranged signal, was executing one final plan. "He's trying to burn everything," Malcolm realized, rushing through the mansion with armfuls of documents. All the evidence, all the properties, everything that could testify against him. But the real target became clear when smoke began seeping under the hospital room door. Charles's floor had been deliberately targeted, the fire alarm systems disabled by someone on the inside. Logan, who had been reading to Charles, smelled it first, that same acrid scent that had haunted his nightmares since his parents' death. "Not again," he whispered, memories threatening to paralyze him. The ward erupted into chaos. As smoke filled the corridors, staff scrambled to evacuate patients, but Charles's room was at the end of the hall, and the flames were spreading fast, cutting off their primary escape route. Malcolm, who had been delivering evening tea, took charge. "The service elevator," he said, urgency breaking through his usual composure. "If we can reach it." But as they tried to move Charles's bed, a burning beam crashed down in the corridor, blocking their path. The smoke was getting thicker, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. Logan felt the same paralyzing fear that had gripped him the night his parents died, but this time was different. This time he wasn't a helpless child. The window washing platform, he coughed out. I saw it earlier today. If we can reach it. Malcolm nodded grimly. It's our only chance. But someone will have to climb out first, secure the platform. I'll go, Logan said, already moving toward the window. The icy winter air hit him as he pushed it open, carrying with it memories of another winter night, another impossible choice. Logan, no, Charles reached for him. I can't lose you too. But Logan was already on the ledge, inching his way toward the platform controls. Behind him, he could hear the fire growing hungrier, greedier. The wind whipped around him, 13 stories above the ground, as he fought to keep his balance. Just as his fingers grasped the platform's safety rail, he heard Malcolm's shout of warning. One of Franklin's men, disguised as hospital staff, had appeared in the doorway, something metallic glinting in his hand. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Malcolm, proper Malcolm, who had spent decades serving others, launched himself at the attacker. There was a brief struggle, a flash of metal, a cry of pain. Get them out, Malcolm's voice carried over the roar of the flames. Now? Logan watched helplessly as Malcolm, bleeding but determined, held the attacker back, giving them the precious minutes needed to secure the platform and begin Charles's careful transfer. The last thing Logan saw, as they began their slow descent, was Malcolm standing guard at the door, his butler's posture perfect even as smoke swirled around him. Their eyes met briefly, and Malcolm gave a small, dignified nod, his final act of service. As emergency vehicles converged below and the winter night lit up with flashing lights, Logan held tight to Charles, both of them watching as flames engulfed the floor they'd just escaped. Franklin's final attempt to destroy them had instead revealed the true meaning of loyalty and sacrifice. The fires divided Evergreen Heights more deeply than ever before. Half the community rallied around Charles and Logan, organizing neighborhood watches and sharing evidence of Franklin's remaining conspirators. The other half, those with secrets to protect, fought desperately to maintain the old order. We can't let this destroy everything we've built, Hazel argued at an emergency community meeting, her voice shaking. The property values alone. Property values, Zoe interrupted, standing before the gathered crowd. Malcolm just died protecting us from a murderer, and you're worried about property values. The meeting erupted into chaos. Old friends turned on each other as long-buried secrets surfaced. Who had known about Franklin's schemes? Who had profited from the mysterious accidents that had plagued the neighborhood for years? Snow fell heavily outside the community center as accusations flew. Parents pulled their children from the private school when it emerged that the headmaster had helped cover up evidence. The prestigious country club emptied as membership lists revealed connections to Franklin's network. "Don't you see what that boy has done?" someone shouted. "He's destroyed our community." No, Mrs. Chen stood up, her quiet voice cutting through the noise. He exposed the rot that was already here. We destroyed ourselves by choosing comfort over conscience. The crisis deepened as more fires broke out, targeting those who spoke up. Fear spread faster than the flames. Neighbors stopped trusting neighbors. Children were kept home from school. The once pristine streets emptied as people retreated behind locked doors. Logan watched it all from Charles's temporary wheelchair as they sheltered in Mrs. Chen's small apartment above her store, one of the few places untouched by the chaos. The boy who had once been shunned by this community now found himself at its center, a symbol of either salvation or destruction, depending on who you asked. "Perhaps we should leave," Logan suggested one night, watching another house burn in the distance. "Find somewhere safer." "And let them win," Charles replied, his voice weak but determined. "No, son. Running from darkness only lets it spread." The turning point came unexpectedly. As Franklin's supporters grew more desperate, they targeted the public school where many of the neighborhood service workers sent their children. But this time, when the fire alarms rang, something changed. Wealthy parents who had previously ignored the other side of the community found themselves running toward the school alongside maids and gardeners, all seeking to save their children. In crisis, the artificial barriers between them dissolved. That night the community gathered again, but this time there was no distinction between us and them. Hazel stood beside her former housekeeper, both offering their homes to displaced families. The country club opened its doors as a shelter. Children who had never been allowed to play together shared sandwiches and blankets. "Look around," Zoe said softly to Logan as they watched people helping people, regardless of social status. Sometimes it takes losing everything to remember what really matters. The fires continued, but each new blaze was met with unified resistance. Franklin's network found their usual tactics failing as the community's silence broke. Anonymous tips flooded police hotlines. Security cameras appeared on every corner, donated by those who could afford them to protect those who couldn't. Even as the physical damage mounted, something new emerged from the ashes: a real community, built on truth rather than pretense, strength rather than fear. Malcolm's funeral marked the emotional crescendo of the crisis. The service, held during the worst blizzard of the season, drew an unprecedented crowd. Former servants stood shoulder to shoulder with society matrons, all united in grief for a man whose final act had shattered their preconceptions about class and worth. Logan, still bandaged from the hospital fire, stood at the podium in a suit Malcolm had altered for him just weeks before. His voice trembled as he began to speak. "The last time Malcolm adjusted this suit, he told me something I'll never forget. He said, 'Standing straight isn't about the clothes, young sir. It's about carrying your truth with dignity.'" Charles, in his wheelchair beside Logan, reached for the boy's hand as he continued. "Malcolm spent his life serving others, but in the end, he taught us all what true service means. It's not about knowing your place, it's about knowing what's right and having the courage to stand for it." The gathered crowd wept openly as Logan placed Malcolm's meticulously kept notebook on the coffin, the evidence that had brought down Franklin's empire, finally returning to its keeper. In the back of the church, several of Franklin's former conspirators turned themselves in to the waiting police, broken by the weight of witnessing such raw honesty and sacrifice. After the service, as the blizzard intensified, people found themselves stranded at the church. What could have been a tense situation instead became a moment of profound connection. The kitchen staff, many of whom had worked under Malcolm, began serving tea exactly as he would have done. He would have hated the chaos, one maid smiled through tears, but loved seeing everyone finally acting as equals. The storm forced them all to stay through the night. Children fell asleep on velvet pews, while parents who had never spoken now shared blankets and stories. Hazel Thompson found herself serving soup alongside her former servants. The barriers Malcolm had navigated his entire life dissolved in the face of shared grief and humanity. As midnight approached, Logan found himself alone in the church's small office, looking at his parents' photograph. Charles wheeled in quietly behind him. "I keep thinking," Logan whispered, "about all the people who died because of Franklin's greed. My parents, your family, now Malcolm. When does it stop hurting?" Charles moved beside him, taking the photograph gently. "It doesn't stop hurting, son, but it does stop controlling us. Look out there." On through the frosted window, they could see the main hall where the community had gathered. People from all walks of life were helping each other, sharing resources, caring for one another's children. Malcolm's death brought them together in a way his life never could. Charles continued, "Sometimes the greatest change comes at the highest price." Logan touched the window, his breath creating patterns on the frost. "I wish they were here to see this, all of them." "They are," Charles replied softly, "in you. In every choice you make to stand for what's right, no matter the cost." The church bells tolled midnight as Logan finally let himself cry, not just for Malcolm, but for everyone lost to Franklin's darkness. Charles held him, their shared grief and hope merging with the storm outside. In that moment, as the blizzard raged and the community huddled together, something profound shifted. The old order had died with Malcolm, but from its ashes, something new and genuine was emerging. The revelation came 3 days after Malcolm's funeral, hidden in the last place anyone thought to look his perfectly organized sock drawer. The butler's final gift to the family he'd served was a USB drive, meticulously labeled with his precise handwriting, the whole truth open upon my death. Charles and Logan gathered in the study, snow falling softly outside as they plugged the drive into Charles's computer. What they found left them breathless. "My dearest Mr. Charles," Malcolm's voice emerged from a pre-recorded video, his usual formality softened by obvious emotion. "If you're watching this, I've finally found the courage to do what I should have done 20 years ago." The video revealed a truth more complex than anyone had imagined. Malcolm had been there the night Elizabeth and Sarah died, not as a conspirator, but as a silent witness. He'd seen Franklin tampering with the car, but fear and misplaced loyalty had kept him quiet. "That silence became my prison," Malcolm continued. "Each new crime I witnessed added another bar to my cage. But watching young Master Logan, seeing his unwavering integrity despite everything he'd lost, I finally understood what true loyalty means." The drive contained more than just confessions. There were detailed records of every conversation, every transaction, every subtle threat Franklin had made over 2 decades. But most shocking was the revelation about Logan's parents. The fire that killed the Fosters wasn't just about property. Malcolm's voice cracked slightly. Mrs. Foster was Elizabeth's old college friend. She'd found Elizabeth's hidden diary, which contained evidence of Franklin's first attempts to seize control. He couldn't risk that connection being made. Logan sat frozen as Malcolm explained how Franklin had specifically targeted his family because of this link to the past. Every hardship he'd endured wasn't just random cruelty, it was part of a calculated plan to erase all connections to Elizabeth's legacy. "But Franklin made one crucial mistake," Malcolm continued. "He didn't realize that by bringing you into Charles's life, he was actually fulfilling Elizabeth's last wish. You see, your mother was more than just Elizabeth's friend. She was her chosen guardian for Sarah, should anything happen. In a way, young sir, you were always meant to be part of this family." Charles reached for Logan's hand as Malcolm's final words played. "I protected the wrong secrets for too long. My death, if it has come to that, is a small price to pay for finally choosing the right ones to protect." The video ended, but the revelations continued. Hidden in subfolders were letters Elizabeth had written to Logan's mother, speaking of their shared hopes for their children's futures. There were photos. Charles had never seen Elizabeth and Logan's mother as young women, laughing together at college, sharing dreams of changing their world for the better. "She would have loved you," Charles whispered, looking at a photo of Elizabeth holding baby Sarah. "Both of them would have." Logan touched the screen where his mother and Elizabeth stood arm in arm. They were trying to make things better, weren't they? Like we are now. "Yes," Charles replied. "And Franklin didn't just kill them, he tried to kill their dream of a more just world. But he failed, because here you are, carrying that dream forward." The snow outside grew heavier as they continued through Malcolm's files. Each revelation added new layers to their understanding, showing how past and present were intricately connected. The butler's final gift wasn't just evidence, it was a bridge between what was lost and what could still be saved. "Malcolm knew," Logan said quietly. "He knew all along that bringing me here wasn't just chance. It was justice finding its way home," Charles finished. "Even if it took 20 years and more sacrifice than anyone should have to bear." Franklin's trial became a watershed moment for the community. The courthouse, usually a monument to privileged influence, filled with people from all walks of life as Malcolm's evidence was presented. Logan testified first, standing tall in the suit Malcolm had altered, his voice clear despite the emotion. I used to think justice was impossible for people like me. That money and power would always win. But Malcolm showed us that truth doesn't care about bank accounts or social status. The prosecution presented Malcolm's meticulously organized evidence. Each file, each recording, each carefully noted observation built an irrefutable case. Franklin's composed facade cracked as his empire of lies crumbled around him. But the most damning testimony came from an unexpected source. Hazel Thompson, her usual polish replaced by raw honesty, took the stand. "We were all complicit," she declared, her voice carrying through the hushed courtroom. "Every time we looked away, every time we chose our comfort over someone else's justice, we helped build Franklin's power. I won't look away anymore." One by one, former conspirators stepped forward. The family doctor admitted to falsifying death certificates. Security guards confessed to destroying evidence. Each testimony revealed how privilege had been weaponized against the vulnerable. Franklin's breakdown, when it came, was spectacular. As the jury delivered their guilty verdict, he launched into a tirade that revealed his true nature. "You fools," he screamed. "Without people like me keeping order, maintaining standards, what's left? You're destroying civilization itself." No Charles responded, his quiet voice cutting through Franklin's hysteria. "We're finally building one worth having." The sentences were handed down: multiple life terms for Franklin, various punishments for his conspirators. But perhaps the truest justice came in the changes that followed. The Lancaster Foundation, under Charles and Logan's guidance, established a legal fund for victims of privilege-based discrimination. The mansion's East Wing became a community center where children from all backgrounds could learn and play together. Zoe, inspired by the events, started a youth advocacy group. "We can't change the past," she told the first meeting, "but we can make sure the future is different." Even the police department underwent reform, with new protocols established to ensure wealth couldn't influence investigations. The detective who had dismissed Logan's case years ago publicly apologized, then resigned. The media dubbed it the Lancaster Revolution, but to those involved, it was simply truth finally outweighing pretense. Former servants sat on community boards alongside their previous employers. Social events became genuine celebrations rather than exercises in exclusion. Most importantly, the conspiracy of silence that had protected privilege was broken. People began speaking openly about class prejudice, about systemic injustice, about the small daily cruelties they'd either endured or inflicted. At Franklin's sentencing, Logan placed his parents' photograph on the prosecutor's table, a reminder of where the path to justice had begun. The judge, looking at the happy family in the picture, delivered a statement that would be quoted for years. The greatest crime in this case wasn't just murder or fraud. It was the attempt to destroy the human spirit's capacity for goodness. But that spirit, as demonstrated by a homeless boy's honesty and a butler's ultimate courage, proved unbreakable. Charles, watching from his wheelchair, saw tears in Logan's eyes as the judge continued. This court sentences the defendant not just to prison, but to witness the dismantling of everything he sought to preserve, a world where worth was measured by wealth, and power meant never facing consequences. As they left the courthouse that day, snow began falling again, not the harsh blizzards of winter, but the gentle flakes of early spring, promising renewal and growth. On the anniversary of Malcolm's death, Charles and Logan stood in the mansion's newly renovated garden. A simple granite memorial bore the butler's name, along with the words he'd lived by: "Dignity serves truth." The garden itself had been transformed. Where once manicured lawns had symbolized exclusivity, now community vegetable plots flourished. Children from all backgrounds tended their plants together, learning about growth and nurture in ways that transcended social barriers. "I've been thinking," Logan said, adjusting the flowers they'd brought, "about what Malcolm said in his video about how some secrets protect the wrong things and others protect the right ones." Charles nodded, understanding in his eyes. And which kind have you been keeping, son? Logan pulled out his parents' photograph, now accompanied by a letter he'd written but never shared. I need to let them go, he said softly. Not forget them, but stop holding so tight to the pain. Together, they read Logan's words. Dear Mom and Dad, I spent so long trying to prove I wasn't what they said I was, a fire starter, a street rat, someone unworthy of love, but I understand now that I never needed to prove anything. You taught me who I am. Every time I choose honesty over advantage, every time I help someone who's hurting, I'm carrying your legacy forward. Malcolm showed me that serving others doesn't mean losing yourself. Charles taught me that family isn't about blood, but about who stands with you when truth demands courage. And Zoe reminded me that friendship doesn't see social barriers. I'm not just your son anymore. I'm Charles's too. And that doesn't dishonor your memory, it fulfills it. You always taught me that love multiplies, it doesn't divide. I'm ready now. Ready to be happy without feeling guilty. Ready to build a future while honoring the past. Ready to let go of anger without letting go of justice. You can rest now, we won. As Logan finished reading, Charles wiped tears from his eyes. They would be so proud, he said, not just of what you've done, but of who you've become. The garden filled with people, community members gathering for the memorial's dedication. Hazel and Zoe arrived with homemade food. Mrs. Chen brought flowers from her store. Former servants and employers mingled freely, their old roles dissolved by shared purpose. Look at what grew from all that pain, Zoe observed, taking Logan's hand. Malcolm would have loved seeing this. Charles addressed the gathered crowd, his voice strong despite his age. Malcolm taught us that true service isn't about maintaining barriers, it's about breaking them down. Every child who plays in this garden, every meal shared across old divides, every moment of genuine connection honors his sacrifice. As twilight settled, lanterns lit the garden paths. Someone started singing an old song about hope and renewal. Others joined in, voices blending regardless of background or status. Logan placed his letter beneath the memorial, weighing it down with a small stone. The photograph he kept no longer as a talisman of grief, but as a celebration of love's endurance. Ready to go in? Charles asked as the crowd began to disperse. In a minute, Logan replied, watching the last rays of sun paint the sky. I just want to remember this moment, how it feels when healing actually happens. Above them, the first stars appeared, twinkling like Malcolm's secret messages of truth, finally delivered. The spring air carried the scent of new growth, of possibilities, of change that had been paid for dearly but would bear fruit for generations to come. The Lancaster Children's Center opened its doors on the first day of spring, exactly 1 year after the trial. The imposing mansion that had once symbolized exclusivity now welcomed children from all backgrounds, its gates permanently open, its gardens alive with laughter. Logan, now officially Logan Lancaster Foster, stood beside Charles at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The crowd that gathered represented the community's transformation, former servants, children playing with those who had once shunned them, elderly society matrons teaching cooking classes alongside Mrs. Chen. When I returned that briefcase, Logan addressed the gathering, his voice steady and sure. I never imagined it would lead to this. But looking back, maybe that small act of honesty was like planting a seed, one that needed both light and darkness to grow. Charles, his health improved but still in his wheelchair, squeezed Logan's hand as they unveiled the center's mission statement, carved in marble. In memory of those who died seeking truth. In honor of those who live serving it. We build a future where every child has value. And every voice has power. The center wasn't just a charity, it was a revolution in how community support could work. Children from wealthy families tutored those who couldn't afford extra help. Those who had known poverty taught survival skills and resilience. Every lesson was an exchange, every interaction a chance to break down old barriers. Zoe, who had become the center's youth coordinator, led tours through the facility. "Here's our library," she explained, showing off shelves filled with donated books. "But it's not just for reading, it's where we teach children about Malcolm's kind of record keeping. About the importance of documenting truth." The old servants' quarters had been transformed into art studios, where children learned to express their stories through painting, sculpture, and writing. Logan's parents' photograph hung in a place of honor, alongside pictures of Elizabeth, Sarah, and Malcolm, reminders of the cost of truth and the power of legacy. In the kitchen, where Malcolm had once maintained rigid hierarchies, cooking classes now brought families together. Hazel Thompson, reformed and dedicated to change, taught alongside her former housekeeper, showing children that good food and friendship knew no class boundaries. Malcolm would have hated the mess Charles joked, watching flour-covered children learn to bake bread. But he would have loved the purpose. The center's most innovative feature was its Truth and Reconciliation program, where community members could share their experiences of prejudice and privilege. The stories were recorded, archived, and used to teach future generations about the importance of social justice. "We're not just helping children," Logan explained to a visiting reporter. "We're changing how they see themselves and each other. Every child who walks through these doors learns two things: they have value, and they have responsibility to help others recognize their value too." As the opening day progressed, something remarkable happened. Children who would never have met under the old social order began forming friendships. Parents who would have avoided each other found common ground. The rigid boundaries that had defined their community for generations began to dissolve in the face of genuine human connection. In the garden, now named Malcolm's Grove, Logan overheard a conversation between two children, one from the wealthiest family in town, the other from the struggling side of the tracks. "My dad says your dad works for us," the wealthy child said, confused. "Maybe," the other child replied, sharing their sandwich. "But here, we work together." Charles, watching from nearby, smiled at the exchange. That, he said softly to Logan, is worth every penny of the Lancaster fortune. The day ended with a community dinner served in the great hall where Franklin had once plotted his schemes. Now, instead of whispered conspiracies, the room rang with honest laughter and open conversation. As twilight fell, Logan found himself back in the garden, looking at the stars appearing one by one, the same stars that had witnessed his parents' death, his years of struggle, and now this moment of triumph. 5 years after the center's opening, its impact had rippled far beyond Evergreen Heights. Other wealthy communities began adopting the Lancaster model, transforming their own symbols of exclusivity into bridges of connection. Logan, now attending law school while helping run the center, had developed a program called Truth Scholarships, funding education for children who exposed social injustice or stood up against systemic prejudice. The first recipient was a young girl who had documented wage theft at her mother's workplace. "You remind me of myself," Logan told her at the award ceremony. "But you're luckier than I was. You don't have to wait years for someone to believe you." Charles, though slowed by age, remained the center's spiritual heart. He'd converted his study, where Franklin had once made his final stand, into a mentoring space called the Truth Room. Here, children learned the importance of moral courage through storytelling and discussion. Remember, he would tell them, showing Malcolm's notebook, sometimes the greatest acts of heroism look like simple record keeping. Sometimes saving the world starts with just writing down what you see. Zoe had expanded her youth advocacy program into a national network. The children who had once been divided by wealth and status now traveled together, speaking at schools about breaking down social barriers. Their signature project was called Malcolm's Witnesses, teaching young people to document and challenge injustice in their communities. The mansion itself continued to evolve. The grand ballroom, where society parties had once reinforced class divisions, now hosted monthly community feasts where everyone cooked, served, and ate together. The former servants' quarters had become a museum chronicling the community's transformation, with Malcolm's story at its heart. Even Hazel, who had once embodied social prejudice, found new purpose teaching etiquette classes with a revolutionary twist. Manners aren't about excluding people, she would say. They're about making everyone feel valued. But perhaps the most powerful symbol of change was the new tradition that had emerged. Each winter, on the anniversary of Logan finding the briefcase, the community gathered for what they called the Truth Walk. Carrying lanterns, they would walk from the spot where Logan had made his fateful decision to the center, each person sharing a story of a time they chose truth over convenience. We're not just celebrating what changed, Logan explained at the 5th annual walk. We're reminding ourselves why it needed to change. The center's success attracted attention from social scientists and community organizers worldwide. They came to study how genuine social transformation could grow from personal tragedy and moral courage. But what they found most remarkable wasn't in any program or policy, it was in the small, daily interactions that showed how deeply things had shifted. Children from all backgrounds played together in Malcolm's Grove, their laughter a testament to innocence preserved rather than destroyed. Former adversaries served on community boards together, their old prejudices dissolved by shared purpose. The invisible lines that had once divided the neighborhood had been replaced by bridges of understanding. One evening, as Charles and Logan watched the sunset from the garden, a small girl approached them with a familiar-looking leather briefcase. "I found this," she said solemnly. "It's not mine." Logan knelt beside her, remembering another winter day and another choice. "And what made you bring it back?" She looked at him with clear eyes, untainted by prejudice or fear. "Because that's what we do here. We take care of each other." Charles smiled, tears in his eyes. "Yes," he said softly. "That's exactly what we do." 10 years to the day after Logan found the briefcase, the community gathered for a very special announcement. Charles, now in his late 70s but still sharp-minded, sat beside Logan on the mansion's front steps, facing the assembled crowd. "When I first opened my home to a frozen, hungry boy," Charles began, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "many thought I had lost my mind. Today I'm announcing something that might make them think that again." He pulled out a document, its official seal glinting in the winter sun. "The entire Lancaster estate, including this mansion and all its holdings, is being transferred to a community trust. Its board will be made up of people from every part of our community, former servants alongside former employers, children teaching adults, wisdom flowing in all directions." The announcement sent ripples through the crowd. Logan, now a respected civil rights attorney, stood to add his own news. "The Trust's first act will be to establish Malcolm's Promise, a nationwide network of centers like ours, each dedicated to breaking down barriers between people. But more than that, we're creating a legal fund to help others expose the kind of corruption and prejudice that nearly destroyed our community." Zoe, standing with her mother Hazel, stepped forward to share the final piece, and in the mansion's East Wing, "We're opening the Elizabeth and Sarah Lancaster Center for Social Justice, a training facility where people can learn to document and challenge systemic inequality, just as Malcolm did." The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The very spaces where privilege had once been hoarded would now serve as tools for dismantling privilege itself. The gates that had once kept people out would now welcome them in. As if nature itself approved, snow began falling softly, not the harsh blizzards of that first winter, but gentle flakes that seemed to bless the moment. Charles reached for Logan's hand, their years of shared purpose reflected in the gesture. "You know," Charles said quietly, "Franklin never understood that true wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you share. He thought he was protecting a legacy, but he was really destroying it. You, son, helped me build a better one." Logan touched the photograph in his pocket, not just of his parents now, but merged with pictures of Elizabeth, Sarah, and Malcolm. A family built not by blood, but by shared values, by choices made in moments of truth. The ceremony ended with a new tradition. Each person present took a key symbolic copies of the one Logan had used to unlock Franklin's study years ago. They represented not ownership but responsibility, not privilege but purpose. Every key Logan announced is a promise to unlock doors for others, to open spaces that were once closed, to let light into dark places. As twilight fell, the mansion's windows glowed warmly, each light representing a different program or service now offered to the community. In Malcolm's Grove, children played regardless of the snow, their laughter a testament to innocence preserved rather than destroyed. Charles watched it all from his wheelchair, peace finally settling over him. "You know what Malcolm would say about all this?" he asked Logan. Logan smiled, straightening his tie in a gesture learned from the butler years ago. "Everything is properly in its place at last, sir." "Yes," Charles agreed, looking out over the transformed community. "Everything and everyone." Above them, the stars began appearing one by one, the same stars that had witnessed tragedy and triumph, endings and beginnings, truth hidden and truth revealed. But now they shone on a community transformed, on healing complete, on a future where every child could stand straight and tall, carrying their truth with dignity. The end. Click the subscribe button, give us a like, and share this powerful tale with your family and loved ones. We'd love to hear your thoughts and the lessons this story taught you in the comments below. From the depths of our hearts, our team extends our sincere gratitude to all our viewers for your continued support and dedication to our channel. Together, let's keep spreading stories that touch hearts and transform lives. Thank you for being part of our growing family of storytellers and truth seekers.